Hello and welcome to All Things Aviation. Have a really great edition of it today where we actually are going to focus on the helicopter industry. I'm pretty excited about it. Longtime fixed wing pilot, but big fan of the whirlybirds, the rotorcraft, as we like to call them. And I have a a panel today, a great set of guests, both professional and uh, um, those that are striving to become professional pilots, I should say. So it's going to be a lot of fun to talk with everybody. This is a program that is designed to encourage the next generation in aviation, also to give them some guidance on what path that they might take in terms of where they are, whether they're currently in school, which one of our guests is, or they've already graduated and they're still working on their ratings and everything, and they are trying to figure out what path or which way they want to go. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce everybody. Before I do that, I wanted to say that I think a lot of times people take helicopter flying for granted, but it's a huge part of our life. So, just as an example, within the last week or two, or actually last several weeks, specifically this week, we've heard on the news about helicopter rescues with regard to the tremendous amount of fires that are going on and people that were trapped. And thanks to the National Guard and other services out there, I believe they rescued almost 400 people, pulling them out via helicopter. And that, I'm sure our pilots here can tell us a little bit more about that. But that's some very difficult flying. You're flying in smoke and with flames around, and you're trying to maneuver, and your visibility is low, et cetera, and so forth. So they are to be admired for that. But on an everyday basis, we have helicopters that are doing everything from news coverage and law enforcement, of course, a lot of medevac, power line surveys, hoisting, search and rescue, and of course VIP transport in the corporate world. And that's just naming a few. When you see who our guests are, they'll tell you, Vince, you just it's the tip of the iceberg. So let me introduce our professional guest first. We'll start with Stacy Sheard. She is the board chair of the Helicopter Association International Board of Directors, better known as HAI. She's also a corporate captain for Fanatics with Executive Jet Management, and she currently flies an Augusta AW139 in the Northeast region. So welcome, Stacy.
Thank you,
And then
Vince.
we have Jeff Smith. Jeff and I go way back. We met through NBAA, National Business Aviation Association. Jeff is the chief pilot of helicopter operations for ROP Aviation. That's a corporate operation. He has been heavily involved in advocacy for the helicopter industry, for heliports, for airport access, et cetera, and so forth. He was with the Eastern Helicopter Association, I think if I said that correctly, Jeff, as well as he currently sits on the board for HAI Helicopter Association International. Welcome, Jeff. And last but not least, we have Christine Yaroschuk. I hope I pronounced that right after practicing it before the show. She is a pilot with the Maryland State Police Aviation Division, flies primarily medevac, but their missions also include search and rescue, law enforcement, hoisting, and VIP transport. So welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
And our aspiring young aviation professionals, we have Connor Langelar. He's currently a junior at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Prescott, Arizona. He is studying aeronautical science, I believe, and is uh, in in the midst of helicopter flight training. And so we'll hear more about what his goals and interests are as it relates to the helicopter industry. Welcome, Connor.
Thanks for having me.
And we have Summer Martin. So Summer got her Bachelor of Arts in Communication from UC San Diego in 2016. She's currently a private helicopter pilot. She's working on her instrument and commercial ratings. And most recently, she was doing client relations she was working as a client relations manager for Jet Effect in Van Nuys. And welcome, Summer. And then we have Melissa. Melissa Shantz has her Bachelor of Science in Aviation Administration from Utah Valley University. And she currently works as an aeronautical analyst for Aeronav Data, which is now part of Garmin International. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you.
Melissa, did I pronounce your last name correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. So why don't we go ahead and get things started? And I'd like to really start with Connor, because Connor is the junior of the three the three aspiring young aviation professionals that we have on the show today. Connor, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you got into helicopter flying and what your interest is as you wrap up things in the next year or two at Embry-Riddle Prescott?
Well, how I got into it is after high school, I moved to New York City, actually. And I spent a lot of time just watching the helicopters land over like the Hudson into Pier 9, I believe it is, or one of the heliports that are right out there. I was like, that's something that's really cool and interests me. And then I'm also a big outdoorsy guy, so I love being outside and I love everything that has to do with that. And so something that I've always wanted to do was actually get into like a heli skiing or heli biking kind of operation. And so after seeing helicopters land in New York, I was like, yeah, this is definitely something I want to do. So I started looking around at different schools and I saw that Embry-Riddle Prescott, I can get a degree as well as go and get my ratings all the way through CFI. And so I applied and I got in. I was like, sweet, this is really cool and this is a really good opportunity. So I'm going to go down to Arizona now and try my hand at helicopters. And so far it's been going really well for me. I'm really enjoying the training that I'm getting here. The school really enjoy it as well. And it's been a really good opportunity. And I think I made a really good choice with where I want to go with my life right now. So I'm really happy with what I'm doing.
So do you have a question for our professional panel?
Well, I was kind of wondering in terms with building hours, is going the CFI route and doing the flight training route a good idea as opposed to possibly joining up with the military? And I'm Canadian, so I was considering joining the Canadian military and flying helicopters for them for a few years as a way to build hours after I complete my CFI rating. So my question is more, do you recommend moving into a military environment for a few years to gain that hours and gain that experience, or stay in just the civilian area and just continue to work as a flight instructor, try to find a tour agency or something and build my hours that way?
Military pilots, anyone? I have to tell you that when I took up aviation, I was too old to risk not getting aviation having joined the military. Because I think when you join the military, you don't say, I'll go there, but I really want aviation. Otherwise, I'm not coming. Is that how that works? No.
Well, you want to go, Stacey, or?
Go ahead, Jeff. I'll go
All
ahead.
right. So I knew that I was going to be a helicopter pilot when I went into the Army. So the different programs, and I don't know how it is in Canada, but the Army itself, if you don't have a college degree in the United States, you cannot go into any of the other branches as an aviator. You can only go enlisted because they only have commissioned officers as pilots. The Army, on the other hand, has warrant officers, which at some point during your career, you will have to have a 2-year degree, then a 4-year degree for advancement. But you don't have to have it. In fact, they still have, to this day, not necessarily a high school to flight school, but they have a direct entry program, which I think is like 19 years old. I can tell you it was the best experience of my life being in the military. I know some really phenomenal people. I had some really great people, commanders, and a lot of different experiences. But to answer your question, though, to go into the military to build time, the experience is wonderful, but it's not the same experience as flying civilian. But the time building is not going to happen in the military as fast as it would if you continue down the CFI track. If you figure out what you want to do, and if you want to be a civilian pilot, then my recommendation would be continue down the CFI, CFII, and you would build hours much faster that way.
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation, and the Canadian military is much different than the U.S. military. So I think the best answer here is for you to connect with some helicopter pilots in the Canadian military. And I don't know if they have them in all branches, but I would connect with someone in every branch that they have helicopters, definitely. And I would talk to them about how many hours they have and how often they fly and what life is like and deployment and things like that, just to see if that fits you. And situationally, because of the COVID pandemic right now, you may find yourself in one position or another, and everybody's route is different. So I would get as much information as you could from the people doing those jobs and get their input and their advice, and not just one person or two people. I would get a lot of people and take this advice. It's the same on the civilian side. If you're going that route, especially if you're going back to Canada to fly, it's a different system. It's a different instruction system there as well. So you could find yourself in a seat right away flying. So it just depends on who you know. You definitely are doing the right things. You're going to Heli Expo, maybe Heli Success, all of these events to network. You need to keep doing that, and definitely connect with anybody in the Commonwealth military. So if there are opportunities that happen to be, I don't know if you have Commonwealth ability to do Canada or Australia or different militaries, I would look at all of those options that you have. Your situation is special, and I think that it would take an individual touch to it to find out more info. And if you need connections like that, there's certainly on LinkedIn and on Facebook groups, you're going to find somebody if you go checking around for information.
Connor, did that answer your question a bit?
Yeah, that gave me a couple things to go look towards and a couple things little paths to follow. And I really appreciate the answers from both of you. Thank you.
Great. So Stacy, you've flown a variety of different, you've done a variety of flying, different types of flying. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and some of the flying you've done and the difference between the types of flying that you've done in a helicopter?
Sure. I was active duty military for 11 years. In that time, I was enlisted and I flew Hueys and Blackhawks before I got out of the Army. And then I had to learn a whole new way of thinking. I had to fly in the civilian helicopter industry, completely different. I was a newbie. I knew nothing, really comparatively. I flew tours in the Grand Canyon. Then I flew for an air ambulance company in Los Angeles out of Van Nuys Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. I flew some single pilot IFR corporate work, and I did some test flying for Sikorsky for about 7 years. And these days I'm flying in the Northeast, in and out of New York City, flying in those same heliports that Connor said he saw helicopters flying into. I think Jeff and I both fly in and out of there all the time. I actually had a flight today that we had to go ahead and cancel due to weather not being able to get into the city. So it's all been so diverse. I think each avenue you take, and in the helicopter industry, I think there's 29 different sectors of the industry that you can take part in, and every one of them is satisfying. And if you're able to do 4 or 5 of them, I think you're a lucky person. If you specialize in one area, it could be the happiest thing of your life. I know Christine feels that way about her job. So I think that's the goal. I think it's finding a purpose, finding something that makes you happy, and variety is the spice of life. So I think the helicopter industry offers that. Are we muted? There we go.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that commercial. Can you hear me now? Oh, the AT&T, I think it was. Sorry, Christine, I was going to say, speaking of you, you have flown for the Maryland State Police Aviation Division for, I think, about 12 years. And you did a few things before that, but what led up to that, and what made you decide to stay with the Maryland State Police?
So what led up to working for the Maryland State Police?
Yes, your career.
Honestly, I identified the Maryland State Police before I ever took my first flight lesson. So it was kind of cool that I actually achieved it. So um, I said before, when we were talking earlier, that September 11th had occurred and aviation was in a downturn. So when I was looking at aviation as being a possibility, that was the perfect time for me to start training, much like you're doing right now. If we're all in a downturn, now is a great time to get your certificates and get your hour requirements and things like that. So when the industry does return, you'll be ready. I mean, you'll be prime position to jump on jobs. But I was a CFI, so I built hours that way. And so in a nutshell, I was a student for 9 months. I was an instructor for 9 months. So as far as hour building, yes, you will get hours when you have a instructional facility that has good weather and a high student population. So those are the two things I would say when choosing a school to teach. Make sure you have good weather so you're not canceling for weather all the time. But when I was looking for this job, or when I was looking to see how I could make this work, the Maryland State Police has just been rock solid. The jobs of the 29, I can't wait for you to list them all because I'm ready to write all these down. The ones that I had seen were fantastic. You could fly fires, you could fly, I'm sorry, what is it when you fly for animal identification? Like in Alaska, you could do glacier tours, you could do any number of things, which I didn't get a chance to do because at that point in time, I was too tied down. We know what that feels like, in a good way, mind you, between children and husband. But all it is to say, while you're young, if you can go out and do all of these adventurous things before you find the job that you can stay with for a long time, it works out beautifully. So after the 9 months of instructing, I've worked in the Gulf of Mexico, flying shuttle to and from oil rigs. And that was amazing. So I started in a Bell 206. I worked through an EC 120, went through a Koala. Oh, I love the Koala. It's the baby brother to the Augusta Westland. You'll notice there's a commonality. We all fly the Augusta Westland. And then I wound up coming back here to the Maryland State Police, to where I was born in Maryland. And I've been flying here for the past 12 years, almost 13. It started in a, Dauphine. So it was almost a step back. And then I came here, and then they switched over to the Augusta Westland 139, which had already had 500 hours in when they brought it on board. So it worked out well for me. But between hoisting, searching, medevac, every day is different. I just couldn't ask for a better job. I mean, it's just stunning. Just stunning.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear that from you. Summer, you have grown up in aviation and grown up around aviation and were inspired, I think you said when you were in Seattle, to actually focus on helicopters. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that happened and what your interest is now as you continue to mount your helicopter ratings?
Yeah, definitely. So in Seattle, I was a personal assistant for an NFL football player, and he was also a very advocate for aviation, especially helicopters, and was a student pilot, but mainly to just do events and be able to fly places that the FAA doesn't allow to fly unless you're doing some kind of training. So that was kind of the loophole to get certain things done for VIPs. So he had 2 part-time pilots, and then I would have to fly the dead legs in between. Sometimes we would drop him off and then we'd have to fly back, and I just arrange his schedule and appearances and stuff. So his pilots always were set up to for instruction and dual flying. So and the dead legs, they're like, I was so, always asking so many questions on flights because it was kind of like a ride along always. And I was always excited to sit in the front. And so they're like, oh, do you want to fly? Like, we're just flying, from A to B anyways. It doesn't really matter. They're instructors. And I'm like, yeah, could you give me how does this work? How do I get into it? I'm so intrigued. I flew briefly in a fixed wing, but it just didn't have that passion behind it that I did then sitting in a helicopter. So they gave me a couple of instruction lessons and just told me about the industry. And I immediately, was like, how do I do it? Who do I talk to? where the flight schools, how do I, go about this? And so they kind of showed me, a couple of organizations, said, apply for AOPA. If you can, go to Heli Expo. It's kind of expensive, but it's well worth, the connections and meeting people. And then obviously, as being a female pilot in the industry, they're like, find the Whirly Girls and other women in aviation and female pilots, and they'll kind of, tell you their path and story. So honestly, at the beginning, I maybe had 9 hours or so of instruction flight, and I immediately applied to every single organization I could find, from AOPA to Whirly Girls, 99s, and just started talking to people, figuring out, people's stories and paths. And I didn't quite understand the difference between like Part 61 and 141 of flight training, and, just the different routes. And I didn't know what to expect at all. I'm so used to airline. I know everything back in front of airline industry. So it was just a whole different beast. And a lot of airline pilots too, they talk a lot. They're great as well. They do talk a lot though, and they don't always know, the helicopter side of things. They think it's exactly the same or similar. But obviously those guys are also very experienced. So things have changed through, when they went to school and stuff. So just kind of, like Stacy and Jeff, just part of HAI, and asked my way around and went to 3 different flight schools actually for my private, and now stayed at my 3rd one to continue my instrument, but just really finding where you're comfortable. I mean, I started in Seattle, then did a lot of my training in Phoenix, and then finished in Long Beach, California. So those are 2 super different terrains, areas, radio communication. So just kind of finding, one, exposing yourself to a lot of different flying, but 2, just finding where you're comfortable. I felt more comfortable in Los Angeles, even though, the airspace is super dense, and it was kind of crazy to solo out there as a private student still. But yeah, just finding the route. I mean, for me, I think I love, like news and tours, and I'm not quite the firefighting adventurous type of flyer. I mean, I might come down my path, but I'm definitely more, the reliable and stable type of flying, just, having a schedule and following that. But yeah, that's kind of how I went into it. And I'm currently in Denver just because of COVID, for personal reasons, but I love flying out in Los Angeles, and work for Jet Edge International out of Van Nuys, and just love being part of events like NBAA. I'm still trying to get out there if I can. And yeah, that's kind of my path. And
Do you have a question for our panel regarding, with everything that you've done so far to present, including a lot of the networking opportunities you've had and everything, what direction are you thinking of taking at this point? Or do you have a question for the panel about that?
Yeah, my biggest question is mostly always, do you recommend kind of going the route, also like Connor was saying, CFI, and just going for hours, or do you sometimes follow aircraft type? Like, if I know I want to go into news flying, and there's, news companies obviously in Los Angeles, and I know the type of aircrafts they're flying, do I kind of, to build hours to go to even apply, do I kind of chase that type of aircraft to have the experience in the aircraft type, or do I just, CFI, in Little Robbie most of the time, and just get hours to be able to apply in the experience? How much does hours versus aircraft type and experience matter? And then when you're trying to like follow your career goals?
That's a good question.
That's an excellent question, and I think it's for. So, what's your goal, Summer? What do you see yourself wanting to do ultimately?
Probably, it sounds silly, but like news flying or traffic flying in Los Angeles. There's obviously so many different companies and routes, but yeah, just staying local, and initially probably flying tours, and then building myself just towards working with the news.
Okay. The good thing about this industry is that what I've learned is everything I thought was my ultimate goal often changes as I, like if you look at someone's resume, as they do different jobs and round out their skills, no job you're going to do is going to be a waste. I think it all shapes you for the eventual jobs that will come your way, or that you'll come to. I think, to be an electronic news gathering pilot is an awesome career. And a lot of people do it. And Van Nuys is one of the hot spots, along with other areas in the world. So they fly a lot of A-Stars. There might be still some Jet Rangers and some other aircraft that they also fly. But knowing that, I would definitely, you want to talk to the people doing that job first and get all of their input. That's a big one. If that's your goal, start making friends with them online now. And then when you're back at Van Nuys, go visit them. Ask them if you can visit the hangar and walk around and see the aircraft and have them take you through what they do and how they talk on 5 different radios at the same time and stuff like that. So you want to find out what it's all about. And you may never know, you might get a ride along. So that would be priceless. Right. So I would look at the route they took to get there. Each one of them, did they, what was their experience before they got to news and how they got there? I think that experience is of ultimate. Having that particular aircraft time is fine. But I know just in Van Nuys, if you know the area, it's ever so helpful if you know that area. In New York, it's the same way. When we look at hiring, we don't look at hiring an Augusta 139 pilot. That's a perk. That's great. But what we need a solid IFR captain that can probably fly twins and has good IFR time in twins. But the most important thing is that they know the area. So the area is of utmost importance, and then all the other things that go with it. Do you get along with them? Can you sit all day long with Jeff in the cockpit? I mean, really? So that's kind of where it is.
Jeff, you have a reputation.
Yeah, so apparently. I agree 100% with Stacy. So typically, and I'll tell you more, I'll go more East Coast to the Northeast, but I think it's a lot of different places. I think even down in the Gulf. You're going to have some flight time. You're going to have experiences, because most operators, no matter what mission you're doing, have to make an insurance. They all have to be insured. Right now, insurance is a very sticky area in our industry. So you have to have a certain amount of experience, and they base that completely on total time. Doesn't matter how much aircraft time and type and all that. The first thing you have to have is a specific total time to be able to work for a certain operator. Usually goes typically in the Northeast, it's instruction. Once you get to the 800 to 1,000 hour mark, you'd start applying for air tour jobs. And those jobs typically, this year's a little off, but those jobs typically are very good turbine time builders. When I first came up here, it was in 1997. I think I was flying on average of 100 and 110 hours a month. So and it was all turbine. I was flying AS350s, but you have to get to these different levels to be able to branch out. Once I had 1 or 2 years, and the other thing, the tour industry for the New York area, just like Stacy said, the tour companies also, to supplement their business, do Part 135 on-demand charter. So in the summer, everybody in New York goes New York City. Most of them go out to East Hampton, which is about 86 miles to the east. And on a Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Monday, it's a Congo line of helicopters going back and forth to the Hamptons. So back to what Stacy said, it's very important for people and those operators to hire pilots, single pilot, find 5 passengers in all kinds of different weather by themselves. They need to know the area, and they need to know the area very well, because it's very difficult in an A-Star with no autopilot to pull out a sectional and try to fly it with cyclic with your knees when you have 5 passengers that are sitting right next to you trying to figure out if they should be comfortable, because you don't know where you are. So knowing your area, and you already have that. You said you flew in Long Beach, so you know what the LA basin and all that airspace looks like. I think there's like 11 or 12 class deltas there underneath the class Bravo. You know, you're the only place in the country that has transition areas at 3,500 feet to get through all that. It's quite complex. So that experience is going to do a lot for you. But I agree. But back to it, I agree with Stacy. You may have a mission where you want to go right now, and that's fantastic. But as you go and you see more, the more you fly, the more you experience, the more the other 28 sectors you see, you may branch out. But at some point you'll find your line, and that's the direction you're going. But you have to meet those requirements to be able to move into the next job.
Yeah, on that real quick before we go to Melissa, Christine, does that apply in your area too? I mean, you guys, your missions vary, and you guys have to land on highways and things like that. So is knowing the territory a factor in terms of hiring and that type of thing?
I wouldn't say that it's a nice to have if you know the area, but eventually you will know your area when you're at your base long enough. So for us, for me, having been here now for 12 years at the same base, which, oh, by the way, is not far from my home. So it's the perfect combination. When we get a call out, we have about a 20-minute anywhere, 30-minute anywhere normal radius to go to pick them up. And I know where that is from the minute they say where the call is coming from. So yeah, it's wonderful for me, and it's wonderful for my job to know the area. And it took a while for me to become that familiar. But I do want to go back a little bit about our building. So things have shifted a little bit to say that when I was coming up and in your position, that it was either tours or the Gulf of Mexico. Those were the two big hour builders. And I chose the Gulf of Mexico. I didn't do tours, so I don't really have anything to speak to on that. But the Gulf was phenomenal. I mean, my time there was so important to learn confidence with my decision making, because it's just me and my client in the helicopter. So the words of wisdom that were given to me are just a crack up. When I finally got released from training, I said, "Okay, boss, do you have any words for me?" He goes, "Yeah, don't break anything." And that was it. Right? It wasn't, be aware of the weather, be aware of the temperature dew point or anything like that. But that's what came of it when I went to the Gulf of Mexico. And I just couldn't be thankful enough for that time.
What was it like flying out to oil rigs?
Fantastic, right? Because it was just me and the helicopter sometimes, and me, the helicopter, and the client. And it was the best fun I could have. Somebody else was paying for the fuel and the maintenance. I mean, we'd just go anywhere. So some days it would be hopping from toadstool to toadstool. They call that the one spike platforms, where they just go down and they service the area, and then they go to the next one that's about 5 miles away, and the next one. And it's an all day out there. So it's very peaceful. You better bring a book. Also, sometimes you get stuck out there, so you better be willing to pack a bag and camp out wherever you are. But
how many hours did you fly on average, daily or monthly or whatever?
About 80 hours a month, and it was a 2 week on, 2 week off. So I mean, it was intense flying. But then we went to, so there's production where it's doing what I'm talking about, or it's drilling, and then it's just a crew change every 2 weeks.
Okay.
Out and back again. So production was definitely more of an hour builder than drilling. And it was so much fun. It was just you and your client in a helicopter, and off you go. It was great. And then flying the bigger aircraft that were IFR capable, the 139, or they had a giant 92, with all sorts of really fun aircraft. Only a couple did I get to fly.
So I had a chance to visit Houma, Louisiana, which is a major area for that. And they had barracks and that type of thing. So did you actually have to stay on duty, on call or whatever? How did that work?
When I first started to fly, there's two things I said I would never do. I would never live in El Paso, and I'd never live in a trailer. I've done both. So anyway, yeah, when I was in the Gulf of Mexico, depending upon where you were, they would either have apartments or trailers. And we lived in a little complex in Fouchon, Louisiana. And it was all a series of, 20 little, happily, I got my own trailer sometimes. It was wonderful. But 14-hour days, 5 in the morning, 7 at night. That was your day. And they could use you or not use you. And sometimes you flew all day, and sometimes you didn't fly at all.
Yeah. Did you develop a taste for crawfish?
Oh, honey, I sure did. Yeah, dinner in every ditch. I tell you, they can cook anything down there and it's delicious.
Yeah, that was my introduction to it. I believe it or not, I hadn't had crawfish prior to then. As I digress about food, Melissa, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? Your background is interesting too. You studied helicopter flying, and you did that starting a few years back. I think you said in 2014, and you've got a Bachelor of Science degree in Aviation Administration at Utah Valley University. How did you choose that as your particular major, and how did you get into helicopter flying? And then now you work as an analyst for AeroNav data. So I mean, you've had quite a variance there.
I have. I came to flying a little bit later in life than some. I had a career in banking, and I started looking at flying helicopters, realized it was very expensive, so I needed a way to pay for that. I already had a bachelor's in communication. So the flight school that I connected with in St. Louis had a relationship with Utah Valley and had a way of you enroll there to get your degree, and then you could also use your student loan money to fly. So that's how I ended up with my aviation degree. It has helped me. There are some pilots that I've talked to that say don't get degrees in aviation. There are classes that I know have made me a better pilot. And I've worked full time through all of this. So when I was in banking, I kind of got bored with that and got burned out on it. And through networking, as I think Jeff said earlier, it was, network. I found AeroNav data, and they hire pilots. They hire mostly pilots with instrument ratings. So that's how I became an analyst, because we work with the instrument charts and information, communications, airspace all day, every day. So it really pays off to be a pilot and have that background for my job.
So what is it that you like to do from this point, or at some point with your career?
I still want to be getting paid to fly at some point. I'm working on my CFI right now, so I'm finishing that up. I would like to fly in Alaska. After that, I'm not sure. I know I want to fly helicopters. There's a few different parts of the industry that interest me, but I'm open to ideas.
So what interests you, and why Alaska, by the way?
When I finished college, when I finished my communication degree, I worked in travel and was in Alaska and got to go on a helicopter glacier tour. And I've always remembered that and that experience. And I fell in love with Alaska when I went, and I want to go back and get to spend some more time there. I don't know that it would be long-term flying up there, but yeah.
So would you like to fly glacier tours?
Yes.
Panelists, do you guys have any advice about that?
I know someone else that fell in love this almost the exact same way, but in Hawaii. Went on a tour in Hawaii and found out this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. So, who is Janie Foster? If you haven't already met her, that was the way she found out, and it was her second career. And I see that a lot in aviation, especially in helicopters. But for some reason, I see it a lot with women that are 30s, 40s, 50s. And I think it's just a point in your life where you may you have money, or you've been working and have a little money saved up, or know how to get a loan. But I think a lot of people start that way, and I think it's a great goal. I love seeing, I love seeing more and more people. I'm seeing a lot more people interested in utility and firefighting these days as well. So Alaska tours, I think power line patrol. There are so many interests, and everything. Every job you can have in this industry is a complete and total skill in and of itself. So I'm sure there's some Alaska pilots that are hanging around that we can talk to and see how you can get up there eventually.
So skills, speaking of that, you were a test pilot for Sikorsky. What was that like?
I was a production test. I was a production test pilot, mainly for Sikorsky's commercial line of products, which overwhelmingly it was the Sikorsky 76 and the Sikorsky 92 aircraft. So, you know, they make a lot more helicopters than that, but I was on the commercial side of the production line.
Sure.
And basically what the job is when the helicopter is built and off of the line, the general job is you take it out, you check it in the hangar the first time it's ever been, you know, had hangar checks and a pre-flight. You push it out and do it the very first grounds that aircraft has ever done, and then you go and do the flights. And occasionally I did get to sit in with some experimental test pilots and do a few of those flights as well. And my job is quite a variety because I also got to instruct pilots that came to pick up their newly delivered aircraft. Or sometimes I got to fly at home with them and train them in their home locations, so all over the world. So it was a great job. Yeah, highly recommended job, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Well, very good. Connor, I was going to come back to you and ask now, with everything that you've heard, is there any particular aspect of helicopter flying that you think you might focus on at this point?
I think I'll continue through my CFI track as of right now. I know I've talked to a few of the Canadian recruiters, and they were saying that you might not necessarily get a flight position. And if I can't get a flight position, I don't really want to join. So I would continue going through with my CFI, hopefully go out through my double I, hopefully work here in Prescott as a CFI for a while. And then I'd like to branch out somewhere else and go tours. I'd like to go somewhere weird. I'd like to do contracting overseas. I was just at the Heli Expo or not Heli Expo, sorry, the Robinson Safety Course in Torrance. And I met a couple people down there, and they kind of told me a little bit about contracting overseas, flying I believe it was Chinooks in Afghanistan. So something like that would be something that I kind of want to look into, but also just explore all those other militaries as well and kind of call some people. And I don't know, there's so many ways to go that I just kind of want to feel a little bit of everything before, you know, picking one that I really want to go to. So
I have two questions for our panelists too, about international flying. If any of you have had experience about that, of flying overseas, and what you would make a recommendation on that. The other one is flying for something like the National Guard, where it's kind of a part-time gig, which allows you to also build hours and stay flying while you're working on other aspects of your career. Can you guys give some insight about that?
I don't have anything.
I do have international flying experience. I know it's not a, you know, for an American pilot, it's besides the international contract flying jobs, there aren't a lot of American pilots that go overseas, but there are a lot of in the UAE, in the Middle East, in Africa, in different parts of the world, there are specific contract flying jobs that you can get. And that is it's usually coupled with certain companies that are out there that do that. And they'll take a lot of international pilots from Canada, from Australia, from France, from all over, and you'll be flying all together in one location. I think I met a lot of CHC pilots when I went to Azerbaijan and I was delivering an aircraft there. We were flying there and I met a lot of pilots and they were from all over. So there are opportunities. It's just you have to dig a little deeper to find those international opportunities. But yes, they're out there definitely. And the best way to find them is to ask. So I think GAL, there are a lot of companies out there, and you know, through times and harder times and easier times, they'll change names and the companies change, you know, locations and names and the job profile, but they're still out there, and a lot of people love that kind of work. So that's definitely one of the many opportunities out there. But I think that's probably your best bet for international flying.
Okay, and both Jeff and Stacy, any thoughts about the National Guard versus a regular branch of the service?
I know quite a few people that are actually still in the National Guard. A lot of people go in the military, active duty, spend a couple of years in there to fulfill their requirement. and then they get out of active duty and go in the National Guard or the reserves. I think it's very rewarding. So I have a son that's also in aviation. He flies airplanes. I want him to fly helicopters, and I tried to talk him into going in the Army. He was in the reserves. He was a Black Hawk mechanic, and I tried to get him to go to flight school, and he's already flying airplanes. And the only drawback that he had in this scenario was going to flight school it takes about 2 years out of where you are right now to stop your life and go, like in the Army. What he would have done, he would have went down to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and did 2 years of flight school and officer training and all that stuff. So that's the reason he didn't do it. But I think I have a lot of friends that are retired National Guard and have been in the National Guard, and they absolutely loved it because they got to do both. They got to do the civilian side, and then a couple weekends or a couple nights a month they could go back in the Black Hawk and all that other military stuff. It was quite rewarding.
Stacy, how about you? Any perspective on that?
Well, I was active duty for my entire career, and I chose not to go into the National Guard or the reserves. And I couldn't wait to get into the civilian industry. But yeah, to do it all over again, or maybe to continue on and with a National Guard unit, I think through my progression, getting to where I was going, I think, as Jeff said, it's satisfying. People find a sense of purpose in it. And I think that's a similarity with helicopter pilots, is that every one of our jobs serves a purpose. And we seem to be people who are looking to serve a purpose. So I think it helps us when our job is meaningful to others. So I think that's just one of the characteristics I see is that we're all related, we're connected by. So it's interesting. We're all trying to find our niche, and the Guard is definitely one of those very fulfilling positions, as Jeff said.
Great, thanks. Melissa, we'll start with you as we start to wrap things up. Do you have any questions regarding your career path and interests?
Do any of the panelists have any advice I know that these are times that none of us have really experienced, but I think Christine, you said you started flying right around 9/11. Do you have any advice to those of us that are younger as far as maybe parts of the industry to look at to build hours and to get into it?
So, like I said, there were two options when I was in your shoes, and it was Gulf of Mexico or tours. And tours, I don't know why I didn't do tours. I think Gulf of Mexico just called me. A lot of time over the water, but it was amazing flying out there. I don't know, Stacy, of the 29 things that are out there, are there others that are strong builders for time? Because those are the only two that I can still do.
I think some of the jobs that you'll find available is we still need to eat, right? Agriculture is a big one. I think if you look in what is it, Black Hills, there are a number of I run into them at the Heli Expo all the time. There are people that are looking to fill positions, and they're not fancy. They are purposeful positions in agriculture. There's cherry drying. There's spraying, of course. There are photo flight opportunities, tours, charter, and then as you're building your time, electronic news gathering. Let's see, I can run the gamut, but oil and gas, there are law enforcement jobs, public safety, firefighting, utility, heavy lift. Was writing a few as we were talking. Government jobs, Screen Actors Guild film production, power line patrol, search and rescue, aerial cattle herding, international contract flying, instructing, of course. There are so many out there. I think that you're going to find, as you meet people going to events and networking with other people, you're going to uncover places and jobs that you never knew existed. So they're out there, and I think that they're going to pop up in front of you as you meet somebody. You may not know exactly, which job you're going for. You might stumble on it, and just leave the doors open and then be open to opportunities.
Yeah,
but
networking is key. Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
networking is key. But as far as our building, would you think that the golf and the tours would be stronger in that way? Or I don't know.
Yeah, I think those are the two main ones there. On the in between, when you're a CFI or when you're instructing and times are slow, I would look at the cherry drying and the agriculture work, the seasonal, and there's opportunities on season in certain areas of the world where they're just hiring a seasonal pilot for tours. So there's definitely opportunities.
And that's what you're going to find in Alaska. We have a lot of people up in the Northeast that was one of their progression pieces was they were doing instruction in the Northeast, and then they would fly out to Alaska, and there's a couple tour companies, and they actually have really good training programs for the transition from the recip to the turbine. And you do a season out there with them. They put you up on the house. It's not the greatest pay in the world, but you see some of the most majestic landscapes in the world. So, but it's a great transition from recip to turbine, and then they would come back and do a tour job or an ENG job if they had that turbine time. And in the 4 months they're there doing tours, they probably build 300 hours. So I've known a lot of people that do that transition, but Stacy's right. There's a lot of in between jobs. So, and the fact that you're a CFI double I and you're in the Robbie and you already went to this because you're an instructor, you got to go to the safety course, which is usually a requirement to go out and do any of these other jobs that are done in Robinsons. But there's a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of unique stuff out there. And as Stacy said, the more you see of all those other different segments of the industry, you eventually find the one that's right for you.
Great. Thank you, Jeff and Stacy, and Christine. So Connor, do you have any other questions that pertain to your career that you'd like to ask at this point?
One other thing is I know with a lot of those the heavier lift kind of jobs, like what Ericsson does and Columbia and all that kind of stuff, they'll take you on, but you start off with just SIC. How does that affect you going into like a different job afterwards? Because are people looking at SIC, or are they only really looking for those PIC hours?
Jeff, experience is golden. I think no matter in what form. And once again, I would talk to anyone that seemed to. I don't know. I'm not aware of anyone who got caught in the trap that they didn't have enough PIC time. But that could very well. It's definitely worthwhile to talk to people that are doing those jobs. I know there's a big picture going around of one of the heavy lift pilots being very young, and is that a job where you get trapped into I think the experience that you get from that would probably outweigh the fact that it's not PIC time, because as you're coming up, normally you're flying a single engine, single piloted helicopter. You're getting into a twin early. So I'm sure that there are pros and cons. Each route people go. But I know not everyone just does the CFI route, although it's a very good route to go. You learn a lot in the process, and CFI is the normal way in the United States to advance, but it's not the normal way in Canada. So being that SIC is probably your next step, or is definitely an option for you, as well as other pilots as well. So.
And I agree. I don't think hiring and I think in our career we went through the hiring process a lot, and I don't think I've ever spent a lot of time on PIC, SIC. It's a lot of total time, and then we drop right down in IFR time's big depending on what job you're going to get, and then it really goes down to what type of experience by the companies and what segment you've worked at. The people that I know that go into those heavy lift, logging, utility jobs, I don't think they're trapped there. I think they go there and they never leave. I think if you would go up to Oregon and stuff like that and go see those companies, those guys have been there for decades and they absolutely love their job. And but remember, it's all for what you want to do. They're the jeans and flannel shirts. They love camping. They bring their own coffee pot along, and they spend the whole their whole shift out in in the tundra. So I don't think they're trapped there. I think they know something that we don't.
Well, that sounds lovely. I'm all for that.
Well said. Summer, last but not least, do you have a question? And Summer, this is what's great about this webcast is that while we've been talking, someone actually told Summer that they have a connection for her with one of the news gathering operations in Los Angeles. So now her networking begins.
Hey, awesome.
Yeah, really grateful for that connection already. I'm looking forward to reach out. Yeah, I don't think I have many questions. This was so amazing, great information, and yeah, I'm so excited to keep connecting and excited for Heli Expo again. I can't wait for March.
Great. Well, as we wrap things up, any word to the wise for these aspiring young aviation professionals? We'll start with Jeff.
Yeah, I just want everybody to know, we've had the conversation with the panelists, but everybody else, that prior to COVID, I know these are tough times and people are wondering, if they spend all this money on getting helicopter ratings and they're not going to be able to use it. Prior to COVID, I would say February, January, I was doing more meetings about workforce integration and how we were going to fill the gap with the pilot shortage. That pilot shortage still exists. Of course, we have to get through this COVID mess. But I think once we get through it and everything gets back to somewhat normal, you're going to find yourself we're going to find ourselves back where we were pre-COVID with that shortage. So don't give up. Keep your chin up, and this will be over, and enjoy your career.
Great, thank you, Christine.
Sorry, I was actually listening to his words. There is no bad experience, and everything builds on itself. You can't keep your options open and keep networking. It will all, and then when you, of course, do figure out what you want to do, charge for it. Really, just keep going. Charge hard, as in like keep going hardly. Don't charge people money for it. You know what I mean?
Stacy, I have to say this too before I go to Stacy. This has been a pretty, kind of one of those semi-serious things about career and stuff like that. But I think any of you guys know that helicopter pilots are anything but serious. I mean, seriously. Am I right? That goes for all pilots and everybody in aviation, but I just have to pick on these guys anyhow. Stacy, take us home.
Okay, well, I think the biggest thing, and of course that's what I'm chairing this year, HAI, is we're looking to get through this. I mean, 9/11, COVID's making 9/11 comparatively, in the delays and getting back to everybody's normal way of business. Of course, it's just going to take much longer, but stick with it. I mean, if it's your passion and you love it, and you're not going to be complete without doing one of these jobs where a helicopter is part of it, then keep with it. And the big thing is, like Christine said, network, talk to people. That is the biggest thing in this industry, is that we all know each other and we all are connected by the same passions. So we're quite passionate about it. So Heli Expo in March in New Orleans, we are full forward. So you can get ready, book your tickets, and get set, because I don't think anything's going to stop us from going, barring some other crazy thing. But by next late spring, I think we're ready to come out and see our friends again. I think it's been a long time now, and so we're looking.
And it's going to be in New Orleans.
I hope to see you there.
I said it's going to be in New Orleans,
yeah.
Which will make it even that much more fun.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Listen, I'd like to thank everyone for participating in this and being available. For you aspiring young aviation professionals, I hope that you found it enlightening about what you can do with your career. And I'd like to thank you pros for taking the time to shed some insight and some light on what opportunities exist and options are out there and that type of thing. So on behalf of the Bob Hoover Foundation, on behalf of our president, Tracy Forrest, and our chairman, Michael Herman, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today and look forward to catching up with you guys again next week. You guys take care. Fly safe.
You too.